Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Nicholas. Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Nicholas, I felt bad. We were just talking about the fact, Nicholas, this whole time we were talking before I started recording was like, oh, I thought you were recording the whole time. So there's a little bit of repeat stuff that might happen here in this conversation. But Nicholas has an awesome background. Your experience is really cool. Your experience with content and everything is really unique. Maybe if you have a second, could you just explain your background a little bit about your work history, what you love about content and marketing in general?
Yeah, of course. So I started my career many years ago in development and production at E. I was part of the team that brought the Kardashians to life, worked with them for many years. Luckily, probably still have their phone numbers in my phone. Don't know if they would answer my phone call if I called them right now, but started in that world.
That's pretty brag-worthy. That's awesome.
I mean, sometimes it's fun. From that, I spent probably about 6 years at E working on that side of the business, but eventually realized that, I'm very much of the ADD generation who can't focus for an extensive amount of time. So quickly pivoted into short form. 2011, went to work on two of the networks that YouTube launched when they had their MCN investment. And then from that, went to Condé Nast, where I oversaw the women's collection for digital video. So Vogue, Glamour, Allure, Self, Brides, W, Teen Vogue, Bon Appetit. So things like 73 Questions, Glamour, As You Sang My Song, that was kind of all produced by my team. And during that time, from when I was at E, when I was at Condé, really my focus was development and production. I then went to HBO and HBO Max in 2020, where I moved into a marketing role where I was meant to be making original content in support of our shows. So that time is really where I was able to learn the marketing side of the business and the importance of the merger between content and marketing. So now I work at Sinclair. I oversee social strategy and digital content across our networks, across our stations. We have 185 stations across the country, 68 produce daily newscasts, some up to 11 hours a day. We have 26 lifestyle shows. And then this year, we are launching 3 new national editorial brands that will be digital only that I'm overseeing.
That's not a small load by any means. So,
but luckily, I have a very capable team around me that does it. It's not just me.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm excited for this conversation. Before we were kind of talking, and we came to this point that I thought was really fascinating: the point of creating news. And often in different businesses, we focus so much on the facts and the hard. We launched this and did that. But we often don't have newsworthy moments. What are you currently looking at when it comes to actually creating news and using storytelling in that process?
I think people have to shift what they think about when they think about news. In complete transparency, when I came into Sinclair, there were a lot of people who were surprised about me joining the company. A lot of the people who have worked here, there are people that have worked here 53 years. That's the longest running employee we have. He has been here 53 years. And I think a lot of people were like, well, why is this guy joining the company? He's never worked on a news broadcast. He's never worked at a station. What does he know about news? But I think what's important to me always is what is classified as news is different to every person. So for some people, news is politics. For some people, news is traffic. For some people, news is weather. But, for other people, news is fashion. News is sports. News is entertainment. And even though I hadn't worked in news, the way that you cover things, is finding a quote unquote newsworthy element to it. I think of someone who's on my team. She loves textiles. She loves fabrics. She loves furniture. She loves wallpaper. She loves all of that. So for her, what is news is when a Broyhill is releasing a new chair, she wants to know who designed it, what was their concept behind it, all of that. So it's really finding that story behind what is news, and you can find that in anything, so to your point of press releases that are going out are often just, here's the facts, here's the figures. We're opening a restaurant at the corner of 13th and Main on Friday at 3 p.m. Cool. Those are the facts. But you can ask yourself, why are we doing it? Why this restaurant? What makes this restaurant unique? Why that location? What do you hope to bring to the neighborhood by opening this? And I think that's where you find like the human connection, and that's the stuff that you see people responding most to. But I think that's the, it's finding that human element in news, that we're trying to do now.
I think that's so important. The human element, that's really taking news and facts and turns it into a story. To quote you from our conversation earlier, what is kind of your process? Like if you're, right now we're talking to marketers who probably have often, done the typical case studies and white papers and talked about new releases and things like that. How do you look at putting the human back into the news to make it a story, to have an emotional connection from your experience? I mean, you've worked for brands and groups that are experts at making emotional connections. How can content marketers try to build that into what they're doing?
I think the important thing for me, I always refer to it as like the emotional resonance. Like what is that taste in somebody's mouth you want to be left behind with? Like facts and figures are dry. It's like eating a saltine cracker. You're like, okay, like it filled me up, but there was no flavor to it. But you want to think about like, what do you want to be left lingering in somebody's mind? And that's kind of like how we approach it. Like, do you want somebody to watch this story with a tear running out of their eye? Do you want somebody to be laughing? Do you want somebody to be angered and motivated to go sign a petition? Like I think people need to think about what is that action you want people to take from your brand existing. I'll continue like the restaurant analogy. You don't just want someone to come buy food and walk out of your restaurant. You want someone to go home, call their friends, post on Instagram, bragging about, oh my God, this food was so flavorful. It was popping in my mouth, and like the citrus and the blah, 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 like whatever the flavors are. Like, people aren't just building restaurants to build a restaurant. You're building a restaurant because you have a chef who's passionate about food and feels they have something to say about food and culture. And so I think that's when people are like marketing, whether it is a restaurant, whether it is, I'm looking around my desk to figure out other products that are on my desk at the moment. It's like a stapler. A stapler is a utility. It's a utility product. But there is also like, oh my God, the joy of I've stapled together all of these photos from the last 20 years of my life. Oh, there's heart in using this stapler to put together a photo collage. There's a way to find that emotion in anything.
I'm really curious why you have a stapler on your desk of all things. That's the real question.
I will admit, even though it is 2024, actually, it's 2024. I also exist in a very like old fashioned way. I keep all of my receipts for things. I have a lot. I have paper clips. I have staplers. I have Post-it notes. I'm a very tactile person. So
that's fair. That's fair. I think we could all use that a little bit more in the digital age. I just want to highlight something that you said and maybe double click on this. You talked about the call to action. Every marketer knows what the CTA means. They know that everything's got to have it. They focus on it. That's like advice point number one. If I were to teach a college class on marketing, that would probably be opening day. Call to action. Here's what it is, that thing. But what you said is what comes before the call to action is the emotion. And I love how you're talking about, and all too often in marketing, we're building content and we want them to do something. That's the whole point. But you're talking about, rather than just building the content, you want them to feel something, and you want that emotion to be the driver that has them do something. How do you find that connection? Because I think that is an insight I have never looked at. Like, I need to look at my marketing content and be like, okay, what do I want you to feel? So you book this demo, or so you reach out, or you refer someone. How do you find the connection between the call to action and the emotion that kind of precedes that action that they're going to take?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's CTAs. It's obviously very much a marketing term. It's what our hope is people do. I think I probably always like throw CTAs out the door. The idea of like, yeah, sure, I'm going to put like post now, share your post, share your story, whatever. Like, but ultimately people are thinking like, why should I share my story? So like, that's why I then lead with emotion. Cause you do want people like, what is the takeaway? I am not going to just share about a bland meal. I'm going to share about, if a meal was miserable, I'm going to give you a negative review and be like, don't go here. Don't do this. Don't do it. But for me, it was amazing and fabulous. I'm made to feel like a special, guest when I'm at the, if the server is so attentive, that they make you feel like family, like those are the things that are going to stand out. And so I think it's probably hard for marketers to separate the two or to like identify the two because often marketers are kept so far out of something, and I think that's where like businesses need to think about like bringing marketing in early when it is like when they are designing a restaurant, when they are designing a product, when they are testing a product, to kind of know from the start. And, I think when I think about my time at HBO Max, often we would get shows well after the fact and we'd be like, well, what was the writer's motivation for writing this line? What was their motivation for like creating this scene? I worked on a show called Rap Shit. There's an exclamation point as the I, so it's not cursing when I say it. And one of the great things, it was an Issa Rae show, and I was once able to have a conversation with Issa and some of the other writers about their motivation behind some of the scenes. Because I was able to sit with them and understand why a specific character did a specific thing and used a certain word. As a marketer, I was then able to like understand the intent, and I think that's where I think marketers have to fight to be in the room earlier because they often just get handed, here's this box, there's a product inside of it, go promote it. And you're like, okay, why did the designer choose blue? Why did the designer put this curve? This is stuff that we often miss out on. And I think if you can get involved in that, then you can understand like, oh, there was every single thing, I think of like, now you can see the random things I have on my desk. I have aspirin on my desk. There's probably an intent behind why this bottle is shaped the way that it is, the size that it is, the function of the cap, the color palette, of that it's pink and turquoise and what does that mean to people. That's the stuff that like marketers can lean into, but they need to be told that, and I think so often marketers are kind of kept at the very end of something that you're not in. And that's what I love about like what I'm doing now. Like we're involved in these news stories from the moment the story breaks, from that moment to the moment it's hitting somebody's feed. So we're able to kind of be in that at all times.
I love that. A couple of things you talked about there that you kind of talked about the story from two different ends at the same time. Like if you're talking about a product or a service or something, going and spending time with the creators and the builders and learning their story, the why, the furniture, why does it look like this? Why'd you use this material? Why this color? Why this wood? All of that kind of stuff, telling that story. But then on the other side, telling the story of the person who's going to sit in that chair or use that product or that service. How does it make them feel? How did that food make you feel? Because there is the story about the chef and their background and their family and their mom's recipe. And she used the freshest tomatoes. So they're really picky on that. On the other side, oh, I feel like I'm on a farm somewhere and, I just picked that tomato off the vine and, oh, it was so fresh. It's interesting, but you talked about how you get marketers involved earlier. It sounds like marketers need to spend more time like journalists. You need to be next to the person who is feeling that feeling or building that product or service. How have you seen that work? Like you just said, you went and sat down with the creators. Do you feel like marketers can do a better job of actually like spending time telling other people's stories rather than just kind of guessing what the story might be?
Oh, 100%. I think of like when I was at HBO Max, I joined the company without having a marketing background. And I'd come into a team that was a lot of people who understood marketing tactics, understood the traditional things that you needed to do. I came into it from a more of a journalistic and editorial background. It would often be, I'd be given lists of like, these are all the assets we need to make. And I'd be like, but why? Those, yeah, I get we need to make a trailer, we need to make promo assets, but like that's the stuff that like I scroll past. The stuff that I stop on are stuff that explain to me what the content's about. And I say all that just because what we ended up doing, the question I would always ask the team in the morning meeting was fill in the following blanks. Last night I watched X and I can't stop thinking about Y. So tell me what your X is and tell me what your Y is, because that's the type of content that we should then be making to market this show because it's going to tell a story. If last night I watched and just like that, and I can't stop thinking about Carrie's shoes, what that leads me to believe is I want to know where Carrie got her shoes. I want to know where can I buy the shoes? I want to understand why did they choose those shoes? That's the type of content people want to see online. When you think about it, you were talking about the tomatoes at a restaurant. I want to know why did they choose aroma tomato over a cherry tomato? What does that mean? And for me, it really comes from like an egotistical, it's really an ego thing. I think we all want to be the smartest people in the room, whether we want to admit it or not. We all want to be the smartest people in the room. When we were at Conde, the way that we would plan our daily content calendars, we always planned at between 3 and 5. We would post what we would call cocktail conversation content. If you were going to a cocktail party that night, what is the content we could give somebody who is going to dinner or drinks with their friends and walk in and be like, dude, did you know? Blah, blah, blah. And so it's like the content serves utility to somebody of making them seem like the smartest person in the room because they suddenly have something as a jumping off point. You go to your friends and you talk about, oh, how was your day at work? Oh, what's the weather? What's the traffic? That can only last you for 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
What about the rest of the 90 minutes of your dinner? And that's even like when you're marketing a brand, you can give somebody that story of like, did you guys see the story about how a stapler was really designed? Oh, but then people may not want to own a stapler, but you know what? The next time they go to Target, they might be like, oh, wait, there's staplers in that aisle. There was that really cool story. I need a stapler. Am I ever going to use a stapler? Maybe not. But somehow that story has convinced them there's something cool about owning a stapler. So that's what I think it is. It's finding that. And listen, I still use the last night I watched X and I can't say something about why, even like now. It's like I use my team now of like, oh, this morning I'm going to run into X while driving, and that's going to impact my life. How? Like there's different ways you can approach that.
I love that point. That's so cool because you're spot on. I remember I watched like a 2-hour presentation from one of my favorite authors, Brandon Sanderson here locally. He writes a bunch of fiction books. And I don't remember a single thing he said outside of the fact that in one of my favorite series, he wrote book number 1, was struggling with book number 2. So he skipped it, wrote book number 3 and came back to book number 2. And every time I talk to anyone about those stories, I'm like, did you know he wrote those out of order? And I thought that's so fascinating. And that's what I always bring up.
Yeah, it's again, like everybody wants to know those random facts. They want to know the random facts, the weird history tidbits. I think of one of my friends jokingly always calls me Jonathan Lipnicki or whatever it is from Jerry Maguire. Because he's like, Nick, you are the person who just has random facts that you will just spew out. And you're like, he's like, but it makes you so interesting that like, and I'm like, yeah, but like, it's just like somehow picked up these random tidbits all along the way. And I think that's, again, like that's what marketers have the opportunity to do is tell you the random tidbit about, I'm now stuck on talking about staplers. I apologize, everybody. The design of a stapler. For science nerds, what is the science of how a staple goes from looking like a U to flattening? Like there's all the different things that went into like a stapler didn't just organically come to exist. There's science behind it. There's design theory behind it. There's how do you make plastic? There's so many different things you can look at for how something comes into an existence.
I love that. That's amazing. Well, we could go on for this for hours, but we've already hit our time limit. But Nicholas, thanks so much for sharing. These are such really cool viewpoints that I know I'll forever hold in my mind. If anyone wants to connect with you and continue the conversation, how can they find you online?
I'm always available on LinkedIn. I'm obviously on every platform. I am the Life of Nikki J, Nikki with a Y, J just as a singular letter on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I don't really exist on Twitter for personal reasons, but any of that, obviously also Nicholas James on LinkedIn. I always welcome people coming and asking questions. I'm open for conversation, so they can hit me up anywhere.
I love it. Perfect. Well, thanks again and have a good rest of your day.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.